Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Ian Scales and I'm the managing editor of TelecomTV, and welcome to this panel session. It's entitled License to Kill, Cellular Operators Want to Be In on the LPWA Action. So I'll introduce our distinguished panelists in a moment, but first let me introduce the topic in a bit more detail. So in case you don't know, LPWA or Low Power Wide Area Networks have been designed for M2M IoT applications that have low data rates, long battery lives, and that operate unattended for long periods of time. These networks have been a real focus for attention for IoT connectivity for about a year or so now, accompanied of course by bullish predictions around how many billions of connected devices there are going to be, real soon now. And up to about now, the excitement has been driven by a range of non-cellular players operating in unlicensed spectrum, or developing kit that will operate in unlicensed spectrum. Some of which have even been deployed by established telcos. In particular, Orange in France appears to be making a major push with LoRa, for instance, a non-GSMA technology. But now mobile operators realise that LPWA will be a significant driver in the development of IoT, and they're determined to get in on the action. The GSMA has established the Mobile IoT Initiative, backed by 26 leading mobile operators, to address the use of low power wide area solutions in licensed spectrum. It's aiming for a first implementation in early 2016 this year and full commercial solutions later on. The initiative will focus on 3 licensed 3GPP standards, LTE evolutions, GSM evolutions, and clean slate technologies to deploy LPWA technologies, and Svetlana will talk about that later. So does this mean game over for the pioneers, or will we see the emergence of a market involving a variety of different LPWA players and business models across both licensed and unlicensed spectrum? And then, if we do, will this diversity represent a plus for the emerging area, providing a range of appropriate horses for different courses, or will the fragmentation stall the evolution of the market? This is one of the big questions we're facing. So, to help us with this 2-tier, highly contested conundrum, we have a distinguished panel. Closest to me is Svetlana Grant. She's Project Director, Future IoT Networks at GSMA. Welcome, Svetlana.
Thank you.
Next to her, we have Alan Tait. He's no we don't.
Nope.
Far away we have Alan Tait, Chief Technical Officer at Stream Technologies, which is a LoRa adopter. And last but very much not least, Aapo Markkanen, who is the Principal Analyst at Machina Research. Together, we hope that the sparks will fly and we'll have a really good discussion. So first, Svetlana, could you amplify my opening remarks in terms of what the GMSA is up to?
Yes, indeed. So the GSMA has been running the Connected Living program, which focuses on machine-to-machine and the Internet of Things for the last 7 years. And about a year ago, we established the Mobile IoT Initiative, which focuses specifically on the low power wide area technologies that are currently being developed in 3GPP, and that will be part of release 13 in 3GPP in summer of this year. So we've done an enormous amount of work to help with defining the requirements for the technologies and basically working closely with operators and vendors to allow them to complete all of the technical discussions in 3GPP. And now we're at the point where we're starting to talk to a variety of ecosystem players, including developers and service providers, basically explaining to them what the technology can do and effectively when to expect to have it in the market.
Okay. Can I turn to you, Alan? Could you sort of do the same sort of rundown, I suppose representing all the others, but talking about LoRa in particular, if you like?
Sure.
Where are we at the moment as far as the unlicensed?
Yeah, well, LoRa, among many other low-power radio networks, are coming into prominence. You obviously have LoRa, you have things like Sigfox, you have earlier ones such as N-Wave and Neo, which has become Huawei and NB-IoT. And the key thing here is it's showing that evolution away from certain cellular operators and applications which are more suited towards a low power, low bandwidth use. Something which GPRS has been used for up to today, but the fact that a lot of carriers are beginning to turn that off means that people are looking for alternatives. And I'd really point to some of the public networks which are springing up in places like Belgium and the Netherlands to show that where GPRS had a very, very good incumbent advantage, now you're seeing alternative technologies such as Sigfox and LoRa really come into the fore.
Okay, Aapo, finally, could you, well not finally, but at this point, could you do a bit of a wrap up on that then? Let's not beat about the bush. Does the GSMA's entry mean that the game is severely curtailed for LoRa, Sigfox, Weightless and all the others?
No, I don't think so. I don't think it means that. As far as we can see, based on our research, it's going to be fairly complex and fragmented space going forward. But there will be, various use cases that can be better addressed by the license model, and also at the same time, certain applications will be a better fit for the unlicensed model. So it's the future is kind of very distinctly multi-technology based heterogeneous networks.
Aapo, could you give us an idea of what the different horses for courses are in this area? What are if we're talking about diversity, what are some of the diversity requirements that need to be met by the different types of technologies?
Yes, well, first for example, you have some endpoints that basically serve as very rather dumb data traps and are just meant to be filled for 10 plus years without doing anything else really other than taking sensor readings and send them to the cloud at regular intervals. That's really kind of something that can be addressed by all of these technologies. At the same time, you have some applications that require some form of downlink connectivity as well, like white goods, for example. If you want to do remote diagnostics from the enterprise back end to the actual device and see why your washing machine isn't working as it's meant to be working, then that's something that requires a downlink. And it's a downlink that is a kind of pain point for many of the players that operate in the unlicensed frequency bands. That's one, and then I think one kind of application came to highlight is the ones that will run in private networks. So the many kind of industrial organizations, especially utilities, mining, logistics, that will probably always prefer having the kind of build your own network and having kind of one throat to choke, so to speak. So those guys are very unlikely to go for the public network model.
So give us an idea from your point of view, what kind of proportion do you see the market ending up with? Are we going to have cellular dominating, the cellular operators dominating in this market, or can you take a view on that yet, or do we see quite a broad diversity?
Well, I try to avoid this word dominating. I think it's a dangerous verb, but I would say that the operators, they're probably going to address this really the long tail of applications. So kind of realistically see them maybe taking 50 to 60% of the market,
right?
Possibly even more, and then something like LoRa networks. I think that they're going to serve, especially in kind of private network model,
right?
Applications that don't come in very high volumes, but they are from very high value markets, such as mining, for example. So that's where the number of endpoints is almost irrelevant, because the value is really in the other parts of the operation. But I don't know, it's too early to give you any exact numbers, but I don't know, could be some kind of 60 to 40 split, 70 to 30 at tops.
Something like that.
Yeah.
So it's not going to be a wipeout from your point, as far as you're concerned.
Well, I mean, it is going to be a very big market, so we're talking about billions of connections.
Yes.
So,
yes. Do you want to amplify that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, we're looking at, we've done a bit of analysis of the industry consensus on the numbers. I mean, we're looking anywhere from 1.4 billion in 3 years' time upwards, and really the growth, I suppose, will depend on how quickly these solutions are made available in the market and how well developed the business models are to bring the customers on board. But generally, in the GSMA, about a year ago, we did the analysis of a variety of different sectors, and we looked at all of the requirements, and we've come to the conclusion that it's very difficult to basically have one solution for all of those, just by virtue of them being so different. And as Aapo mentioned, there are customers who do not necessarily want to use public networks. They have their reasons to go the private network route, and that's fine. I think there's probably going to be room for everybody. in this market. I think it's fair to say that mobile operators, and by the way, a lot of them are looking at a variety of technologies as well. I think they're obviously going to be very ambitious, but even now, in the machine-to-machine market, a lot of them partner, a lot of them work with other types of providers, and they have huge number of assets in some sectors where they're already well established. You can argue that anything that might include B2B2C, for example, whichever it would be wearables and things like that, that could potentially be an interesting market. A lot of them already have established relationships with utilities companies, with metering providers, for example, industrial connectivity in particular. A lot of the machine-to-machine customers are already using mobile networks, and so it will be a very logical progression for them to continue using low power wide area, potentially in place of the technologies that are either phased out or maybe just no longer make sense because this new and better thing is available. So yeah, I think operators will be ambitious. I would agree that 100% of the market is not realistic, but they'll go for as much obviously as they can, but in partnerships as well as on their own.
What do you make of operators who also adopt the proprietary technologies? For instance, Orange in France is deploying LoRa now, and there are other operators deploying Sigfox networks there.
Yeah,
do you see them
a lot of
emerging,
them,
sort of being adopted by the mobile operators eventually?
There are quite a number of operators who have looked and have trialed, and some of them are deploying it commercially, the analysis technologies. Some of them went on record and mentioned that this is something they want to do in the short term until the ramp up of the licensed technologies, and they want to obviously see how it works. It's a new technology, and I think a lot of these technologies will require a completely new business model. They want to understand how it works. I wouldn't be surprised if some of them continue. For others, it will probably be a short-term game to understand and then either potentially move completely to licensed or reconsider and redefine the strategy in general. It really makes sense from an operator's viewpoint to use the assets they have, and for them it's the spectrum, right? It's a limited resource that they have access to, and the 3GPP based licensed technologies allow basically a reuse of this spectrum and a better use of this spectrum. For some of these technologies in band, for example, so it's a completely use and chunking up of the existing spectrum for the new types of customers. So it would make sense from the economic viewpoint for them to go with the licensed, but certainly from a customer acquisition and exploration and research and development perspective, they are looking at a variety right now.
How does that issue look like from your side of things, Alan? Do you concur with a lot of that?
To be honest with you, I don't disagree with anything my two colleagues here have actually said. I think in the future there's going to be a number of different use cases which will require a number of different technologies, and we're seeing that today. Stream is a communications provider. We work across cellular, satellite and low power radio networks. We provide management and communication services across all of them. And what we see is that there's reasons customers come to us when they want LoRa, and it's very much about control, their own private network, the ability to route data where they want it, and sometimes where it's because cellular isn't available and they want to be able to backhaul over satellite or something else because they need to put coverage in an area where they don't have it. But I think, to Svetlana's point, it really comes down to the mobile networks out there today. They do have the power of incumbency. They're there, they have the architecture, they have the infrastructure. When they decide to release a low power radio standard, it will get lots of traction. It will be picked up. Stream as a company, we will probably provide it as a service as well. But the interesting thing is, I've always thought that there's this window of opportunity for low power radio networks, be it LoRa, be it Sigfox, be it any of the rest of them, and that is until these networks dip their fingers and toes in the water, work out what they want to do, and then the license alternative comes along. If LoRa can get a large enough foothold, which it is beginning to get, it's getting more and more market share, and mobile network operators are deploying it, it may well become one of those de facto standards, and it may move into the license band. And we're seeing at the moment, especially in the US or in larger urban areas, that the ISM bands that all of these networks work in are becoming congested. And your time on air issues in terms of transmit power, coverage, and what you need to do to put these sites up, it is becoming more and more difficult. We worked with a company called Link Labs in the US. They've done spectrum analysis in some of like the top 10 big cities in the US, and it's almost completely saturated in ISM. So that, I think, is one of the key challenges we're going to be looking at in low power radio. I think the concept behind it is really sound in terms of low power use, low data rates, perfect use case for things like smart cities, municipalities, other things that need to be deployed. But there does need to be some area of the spectrum set aside for that specifically.
And what's the GSMA view on that, Svetlana? In the long term, do you see this heterogeneous network idea, which comes to a certain extent with 5G, being applied to the low power networks as well, and that you would be able to kind of bring them into the family where an operator wanted to?
Yeah, even if you look at the operators now, I think it's fair to say that very few of them are pure mobile companies, even nowadays, and they use a variety of fixed broadband networks, fiber, Wi-Fi, and so on and so forth. And even in the smart home deployments, a lot of them are currently using the hub plus short range technology combination between Zigbee, Z-Wave, and so on and so forth. So I think that they're certainly open-minded about using a combination of technologies to address a specific requirement from a customer. The low power wide area technologies are developed as wide area technologies, so potentially they don't necessarily require the same setup with hub licensed or fixed plus unlicensed. They are built to basically address the direct connection. However, you can think of scenarios where it might be a combination of technologies deployed for a particular customer if it suits the circumstances. I think that operators are very commercially minded and very pragmatic about it, driven by shareholders ask to be very pragmatic about it. Whatever works to work with the customer is what they're looking to do. But certainly, as I said, the other side of the equation is the cost, obviously. So adding any new network basically requires a commitment to designing it. From anything, LoRa, Sigfox, you obviously need to put a lot of effort into deploying it, designing it, testing that it doesn't interfere, and so on. And so I think it's fair to say for majority of operators, it really makes sense to use the existing networks because it just cuts on the maintenance. If they do the software upgrade on their existing sites, then they don't need to deploy any additional hardware and so on. So I think that the pragmatic side of things will probably dictate what in the end is going to be supported. And of course, there will be coexistence, I'm sure, but once you have the interoperability fully in place for the 3GPP solutions, I think it will probably kind of be that ramp up and a quick growth that we'll expect to see.
How will that picture change when we really get into developing 5G and deploying 5G? Do you see that being the point where you would more easily be able to, as an operator, run lots of different radio networks off the same core infrastructure?
Yeah, to be honest, we need to now focus on using LTE and 4G for low power wide area.
Well, it's supposed to be
sure
2020.
It will be used. I'd be curious.
Not that far away.
5G.
5G. 2020.
Have we defined it yet?
I don't see it being relevant before 2025.
Okay.
In this context.
So I think there's still a bit of run for the.
I think the new Cat 1 and Cat 0 on LTE, I think they're going to play quite a large part in taking over the previous GPRS market, especially in the US, where they're now looking at much lower power, much lower data rate LTE-based devices. And if you again looking at the mainland US, they've gone from CDMA, GSM networks, which weren't compatible, to everyone now runs LTE. So there's a big push to get the cost down, get the license cost down, and get the power usage down on the new LTE modules to take over that market. So that's quite interesting to see how that's being driven. And again, it comes down to the economics of it. You know, you've already got coverage from the incumbent network there, why not use what they're pushing out?
Absolutely. I mean, the low power, the IoT market is in general is the wide coverage, low cost type of game, right? So I think at the point when 5G gets to that equilibrium of covering enough of the territory, maybe beyond the urban areas, and also having sufficiently low cost. I'm sure operators will look at that again, and I think it'll just take a little bit of time to come to that. And that's the attractive side of the 3GPP low power technologies nowadays is that they allow to reach that coverage fairly quickly because of the software upgradability. So I think these technologies will probably be in the market for a while before 5G ramps up sufficiently. But I mean, the GSMA works on 5G as well, and for sure there's a lot of effort going into that. And IoT, I know, is part of the discussion. But
Yes.
At least in the future IT networks team now, our focus is really on,
Of course.
LPWA.
Tomorrow's another day. Let's tackle the diversity problem. I put in my notes, is it diversity or is it fragmentation? Now there are voices within the industry that say all of these different network types are actually holding the market back, especially the consumer market. So let's tackle that. Are all of these different radio technologies jostling in the marketplace actually putting off the rise of the market, or do we need that diversity to scout out all those niche applications?
I think
Alan, let's
I
tackle it
think we
first.
need diversity because I know I've worked in M2M and IoT for 10 years now, and essentially I've seen it from when it used to be SMS and CSD on mobile networks through GPRS, now into LoRa style based networks as well. And each of them is answering a different use case. So we could have, for example, we have a network in Glasgow, we could have run all our nodes on GPRS if we'd chosen to. But the reason we went with LoRa is because for its smart city potential is actually much higher. You can put much smaller, cheaper chips out for longer, with less battery, with less power, and it makes a difference. So I would say the low power radio networks specifically are definitely an evolution of the current use case for M2M and IoT. Because one of the biggest complaints I always get from anyone is the amount of batteries you have to put in for example, a gas smart meter. That has to last for 10 years. We'll have a battery about that size. You put a LoRa one out and it's a third of the size, if that. So I see it as, I wouldn't say it's fragmentation, I would say it's evolution.
Okay, evolution and diversity.
Yeah.
Good things. Aapo, what do you think?
Yeah, I prefer using the word choice over fragmentation.
We've all got different words, that's good.
I think from the enterprise point of view, the beautiful thing here is that, let's say give it like 5 years, you'll be able to substitute some of these wide area technologies with what you would now categorize as short range. So like sub-gigahertz Wi-Fi coming, thread really being commercial grade. I mean, iterations of Bluetooth, low power mesh. I mean, in reality, there's also that side of things will offer a lot of kind of substitutive technology. So that's great because it keeps the also potentially rent-seeking tendencies and monopolistic practices in check.
Yes.
Kind of really shifts the balance of power towards the developers and the enterprises.
Svetlana, do you have any input on that?
Yeah, I completely agree that for any new market, for any emerging market, you need to have that starting point where there are a lot of options that are being considered instead of maybe having one imposed. And I think that the market will ultimately decide, even for the standardized technologies, for the 3GPP technologies, there are a lot of discussions from a very wide ecosystem and a lot of sort of balancing interests that are now in place to kind of go with this. Standards-based solutions. But yeah, ultimately, as with any new market, you have to go through that wisdom of choice and then the decision, and then it will eventually, come to a, maybe for the mass market to a set of or one technology, But initially, it's a good thing to have a little bit of competitive heat. Sure.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
apologies.
That's great. Well, look, I'll have to wrap it up now. May I thank the panel very much for their answers. That's been great. Thank you very much. So I hope you enjoyed that.